I am Alina Brooks, and I was 24 years old when I realized my parents had been quietly planning my death for over 6 months. Before I go any further, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. You never know who might be listening to this story while standing in the middle of a danger they haven't fully recognized yet. Sometimes, hearing someone else survive is the warning your heart has been waiting for. That morning began wrapped in false kindness. The kind that feels soft on the outside but hides something sharp underneath. I didn't know it then, but looking back, everything about that day was staged. Every word, every smile, every small gesture rehearsed to perfection. I had just been promoted to associate risk analyst at Hawthorne Capital, a firm in downtown Milwaukee. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was honest work, and it was mine. I'd worked toward it for years, grinding through internships, student loans, late nights, and imposter syndrome. That promotion felt like proof that I was finally becoming someone. When I walked into the kitchen that morning, the smell stopped me in my tracks. Buttermilk pancakes. My mother, Denise, stood at the stove wearing a cardigan she usually saved for church. She flipped a pancake with a grace I hadn't seen since I was a kid. The counter was neatly set. Plates warmed. Syrup already poured into a small glass pitcher. She hadn't cooked breakfast in years. Not since my sophomore year of college, when she'd announced she was done playing house. "You're up early," she said brightly, smiling too wide. "Sit, baby. Eat while it's hot." Something flickered in my chest, confusion mixed with an old, childlike hope. I sat down, trying to ignore the quiet alarm bell ringing somewhere in my gut. She slid the plate in front of me. "Extra syrup. Exactly how I liked it. Your father and I are so proud of you," she said, squeezing my hand. "You've always been our miracle." Miracle. The word settled on my skin like warmth. I wanted to believe her. I wanted that morning to mean something good. My father, Robert, came in moments later, keys in hand, freshly shaved, dressed better than usual for a weekday. "Take my Audi today," he said casually. "Your car's been making that noise again." I frowned. "Are you sure?" He laughed softly. "Brakes are solid. Steering's smooth. I just had it serviced." Then he smiled and added, "You deserve to ride in something nice, sweetheart." Sweetheart. He hadn't called me that since I was 12. That should have been my second warning. There were other things too. My Uncle Caleb showing up at 6:45 in the morning with no explanation. My aunt's SUV parked down the street instead of in the driveway. My younger brother Evan hugging me too long before grabbing his backpack. Too many details. Too many threads that didn't belong together. But I ignored them all. I finished breakfast, hugged my mother, inhaled the familiar scent of her lavender lotion, and grabbed my leather tote, my parents' promotion gift. I remember thinking how generous they'd been lately. Too generous. I walked out into a bright October morning. Crisp air. Blue sky. The kind of day that makes you feel lucky to be alive. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the road. A text from my mother. "No matter what happens, remember we love you." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was overthinking things, that families were allowed to be affectionate without ulterior motives. I merged onto the interstate. Traffic was heavy but moving. I was humming softly, thinking about my first day in my new role, imagining the email I'd send my best friend later, bragging just a little. The red light ahead came up fast. I pressed the brake. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. The pedal sank straight to the floor. My chest exploded with panic as the speedometer climbed past 60. Cars crowded the intersection, delivery vans, commuters clutching coffee cups, a school bus easing forward. I slammed the emergency brake. It clicked uselessly. Someone had cut it. Time stretched and collapsed all at once. My hands locked around the wheel as my mind raced through impossible options. Concrete barriers to the right. A semi-truck inching forward to the left. And then the thought hit me, cold and sharp. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Adrenaline surged through my body as I yanked the wheel, scraping concrete, sparks screaming against metal. The car spun once, then twice. The world blurred. I aimed for chaos over certainty, for pain over death. The impact came hard. Airbag. Heat. Darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world was upside down. Blood dripped into my vision. Sirens wailed somewhere close. Someone was shouting my name. And against all odds, I was alive. I woke up in St. Anne's Medical Center with 17 stitches along my scalp, 2 cracked ribs, and a concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like knives. A detective stood at my bedside, Marisol Grant calm, composed, eyes sharp with questions she hadn't asked yet. "That car was a death trap," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have survived." She showed me photos on a tablet. Brake lines cut clean. Emergency cable severed. Airbag deliberately delayed. "This wasn't wear and tear," she said. "This was sabotage." My mouth went dry. Who had access to the vehicle? Before I could answer, the door burst open. My parents rushed in. My mother crying. Mascara streaked. Hands shaking. My father looking devastated, grief worn like a tailored suit. "Oh my God, Alina," Denise sobbed. "We thought we lost you." She hugged me too tightly. I flinched. She felt it. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked softly. "Does it hurt?" "Everything hurts," I thought. Detective Grant stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I need to ask you some questions about the vehicle." My mother's face crumpled. "Questions? Why?" "Attempted vehicular homicide," the detective said calmly. Denise's eyes flicked, just for a split second, to my father. That glance told me everything. And in that moment, lying broken in a hospital bed, I realized the people who raised me had been watching me die in their minds long before I ever pressed that brake pedal. The hospital room felt smaller every time I breathed. The walls pressed in, and the steady beep of the monitor sounded too much like a countdown. Detective Marisol Grant stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, watching my parents carefully as they performed their grief. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from her purse, her shoulders shaking just enough to look convincing. My father stood close to the window, hands clenched behind his back, jaw tight, the picture of a man holding himself together for his injured daughter. They looked exactly how parents were supposed to look. And yet something inside me had shifted, like a lens snapping into focus. I couldn't unsee that glance anymore, the one my mother had given my father when the word homicide was mentioned. It replayed in my mind on a loop, growing heavier every time. Detective Grant cleared her throat. "I need to speak with Alina alone for a few minutes." Denise hesitated. "Can't we stay? She's been through so much." "I'm sure," the detective replied evenly. "But this is standard procedure." My father nodded quickly. "Of course. We'll be right outside, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt far too final. Detective Grant pulled up a chair and sat closer. Her voice dropped. "I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you could put you in danger if the wrong people find out you know." My stomach twisted. "Your parents took out a life insurance policy on you," she said. 8 months ago. The amount is $1.6 million. They're the sole beneficiaries." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never agreed to that." "You signed the paperwork," she said gently. "The signature matches yours." She turned the tablet toward me. My name stared back in familiar handwriting. My hand cramped as if I'd just written it again. "They told me I was signing trust documents," I said. "Something my grandmother left." Grant nodded slowly. "That aligns with what we suspected." She didn't stop there. "Your father's construction business collapsed 6 weeks ago. Nearly $900,000 in debt. Foreclosure proceedings already started on the house. The policy would have cleared everything, and left plenty behind." The room tilted. My ears rang. "They were drowning," Grant continued. "And from what we can tell, someone with mechanical experience sabotaged the car. That points toward your Uncle Caleb." My vision blurred. I thought about my mother braiding my hair before school. My father teaching me to ride a bike. Sunday dinners. Birthday candles. "They wouldn't," I whispered. "They couldn't." Grant didn't argue. She just said, "People do things they never thought they were capable of when desperation meets opportunity." I discharged myself the next morning against medical advice. Detective Grant didn't stop me. She only pressed her card into my hand and said, "If you confront them, you put yourself at risk. If you stay, they'll watch you. Be smart." I was very smart. I went home, packed only what I could carry, and disappeared. I emptied my savings, $14,500 I'd been putting aside since college. I grabbed my passport, my birth certificate, and a handful of clothes. I left my phone behind, factory reset, and bought a burner with cash. My parents called nonstop. My brother Evan texted me, confused and scared. "Where are you? Mom won't stop crying." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I left Milwaukee under my middle name and took a bus to Madison, where my old college roommate Nia lived in a cramped apartment above a nail salon. She opened the door, took one look at my stitches, and pulled me inside without asking questions. When I told her everything, she sat very still. "That's not just betrayal," she said finally. "That's attempted murder." "I know. You can't go back," she added. "Not yet." I stayed on her couch, worked cash-only cleaning jobs, and learned how to become invisible. No social media. No debit cards. No patterns. Back home, I was officially a missing person. My face appeared on the local news. My parents gave interviews, their grief polished and tearful. "She survived the accident," my mother said on camera. "But the trauma, maybe she doesn't remember who she is. We just want her safe." 7 months after I disappeared, they held a memorial service. I watched the live stream on Nia's laptop, my hands clenched in my lap. The church was full. Photos of me lined the front. Graduation. Prom. Smiling birthdays. My father spoke beautifully. His voice broke at all the right places. "If you're watching this, baby," he said, staring straight into the camera, "we forgive you. Just come home." My blood ran cold. Detective Grant was there too. I recognized her standing near the back, watching everyone instead of praying. That night, I called her from my burner. "They're spending money," she said. "Your uncle paid off his mortgage. New SUV. Trips. Follow the money." So I did. I enrolled in online courses, criminal justice, forensic accounting, insurance fraud. I studied nights and worked days. I learned how conspiracies unravel, how people slip up. I learned patience. I learned anger could be sharpened into purpose. 14 months after the crash, I returned to Milwaukee under a new name. Different hair, different weight, different walk. I walked into the police department and asked for Detective Grant. When she saw me, she just stared. "Jesus," she whispered. "You're alive." "And ready," I said. "Let's finish this." Walking back into Milwaukee felt like stepping into a life that no longer belonged to me. The streets were familiar, but I wasn't. I moved through them like a ghost wearing someone else's skin. Careful, observant, alert. Every red light, every parked car, every reflection in a storefront window reminded me how close I'd come to dying without ever knowing why. Detective Marisol Grant didn't waste time. "You disappear again, and I can't protect you," she said, leaning against her desk. "If you're doing this, you do it the right way. Inside the system." That was exactly what I wanted. With my coursework nearly complete and my financial background already verified, I was brought on as a civilian analyst under a restricted identity. Officially, I was Alina Moore, a financial crimes consultant assisting with insurance fraud investigations. Unofficially, I was the victim assigned to prove her own attempted murder. My parents didn't know I was alive, and that ignorance became our greatest weapon. The investigation unfolded slowly, deliberately. We didn't rush arrests. We didn't spook them. We watched. I reviewed transaction logs late into the night, tracing money that moved like nervous prey. Split deposits, shell accounts, structured transfers under reporting thresholds. My uncle Caleb stood out immediately. Within weeks of my crash, $240,000 appeared across 4 different accounts tied loosely to him. Mechanics don't suddenly have that kind of money. I listened to recorded phone calls where my mother asked insurance representatives questions that sounded harmless on the surface. How long before a missing person is legally considered deceased? What documentation is required if there's no body? Her voice was calm, curious, prepared. My father's emails were worse. Deleted drafts recovered from old backups. Stick to the plan. No contact until everything clears. We can't afford mistakes. They talked about me like I was already gone. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I broke down. Not loudly, just silently, shaking, mourning the parents I thought I had. I realized grief wasn't reserved for death. Sometimes it came from realizing the people you loved never truly existed. The case tightened. A former employee of my father's company, a foreman named Leo, agreed to talk after a few drinks. He was desperate, Leo said, staring into his glass. Kept saying everything would be fixed soon. Said he had an insurance thing lined up. I said nothing. Let silence do the work. Leo swallowed. Then your accident happened. That was enough. Caleb cracked first. Faced with search histories, bank records, and surveillance footage placing him near the car days before the crash, he folded in less than 48 hours. He confessed. He said my father had approached him with the idea. Said my mother handled the paperwork. Said they promised him a cut if everything went clean. It was never supposed to fail. The arrests happened early in the morning. I stood across the street, watching as officers approached my childhood home. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Ordinary. Harmless. My mother answered the door in her robe. She screamed when she saw the cuffs. My father didn't. He went quiet, eyes scanning the officers, calculating even then. When he saw me standing behind Detective Grant, his face collapsed. "Alina," he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know him that. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. Additional charges followed: embezzlement, wire fraud, falsifying documents. The trial lasted months. I testified. Not as a daughter. As a survivor. I spoke about the breakfast. The car. The brakes. The look my mother gave my father in the hospital. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I let facts do the damage. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. They were sentenced to decades. I walked out of the courthouse lighter than I'd felt in years. 2 years later, I sat on a bench in Lakefront Park, watching my brother Evan talk about college. He was taller now. Smarter. Still gentle. "They asked about parole hearings next year," he said quietly. "I know. Will you go?" No. I didn't need to see them again. I'd already buried the part of myself that loved them without question. I work financial crimes now. I investigate fraud, abuse, betrayal. I help people who were hurt by those they trusted most. Survivors recognize predators. And every day I wake up grateful. Not just to be alive, but to be aware. If this story reached you, if it stirred something inside your chest, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. You never know who might be listening, realizing they're not alone, and that surviving isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of justice.